In the dark, restless hours before dawn in Genoa City, when the lights of the towering corporate buildings still flickered against the quiet streets, a dangerous plan was already in motion. For weeks the feud between the Abbotts and the NEWMANs had been escalating, but no one, not even those closest to the chaos, could have predicted just how far things would go. Billy Abbott stood inside his dimly lit apartment, staring down at the burner phone in his hand, the tension in his shoulders visible even in the half-light. Across from him, Phyllis Summers leaned against the kitchen counter with a calculating look in her eyes, her arms folded as if holding herself together by sheer force of will. They both knew the truth now, and the truth was horrifying. Jack Abbott, the pillar of the Abbott family, the man who had spent his life battling Victor NEWMAN, was dying. Worse still, Jack's fate was tied directly to Victor's newest scheme. According to the information Billy had uncovered through one of his shadier contacts, Jack had been secretly drugged with a rare toxin during a confrontation engineered by Victor's people. The poison wasn't immediate. Instead, it was designed to work slowly, painfully, giving Victor leverage over the Abbotts. The antidote existed, but only one person had it, Victor NEWMAN himself. And Victor had no intention of giving it up unless Jack's family surrendered everything. Billy's jaw tightened as he repeated the words he'd heard only hours earlier, 48 hours. That was the window before the toxin shut down Jack's organs one by one. 48 hours before Genoa City lost one of its most powerful men. Phyllis stepped forward, her expression sharp and fierce. "Victor thinks he's untouchable," she said quietly. "He thinks everyone is too afraid of him to fight back." Billy looked up at her. "So what are you saying?" Phyllis didn't hesitate. "We take Victor." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Billy blinked, stunned at first, but the idea began to take root almost immediately. "Kidnap Victor NEWMAN?" he asked slowly. Phyllis nodded. "Exactly. If he's the only one with the antidote, then we make him talk." Billy let out a bitter laugh. "You realize this is insane, right?" "No," Phyllis replied calmly. "What's insane is letting Victor NEWMAN murder Jack Abbott and walk away with another victory." The truth of it hit Billy hard. Jack had always been more than just his brother. He had been Billy's protector, his mentor, the one person who believed Billy could be better than his worst mistakes. The thought of losing Jack, because Victor wanted to win another petty war, was unbearable. Billy's eyes hardened with resolve. "Okay," he said quietly. "Then we do it." The plan formed quickly, fueled by desperation and anger. Victor was expected to return to the NEWMAN ranch late that night after a meeting downtown. His security team was formidable, but Billy knew something about Victor that most people didn't: his arrogance. Victor believed no one would dare attack him on his own turf. That belief was about to become his greatest mistake. Later that night, a black SUV rolled silently down the long private road leading to the NEWMAN ranch. Billy sat behind the wheel while Phyllis checked the tranquilizer gun hidden beneath her coat. The tension inside the vehicle was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Last chance to back out," Billy muttered. Phyllis didn't even look up. "Not happening." Billy nodded grimly. As they approached the gate, Phyllis hacked into the security system using a tablet she had borrowed from an old tech contact. Within seconds, the gate slid open as if welcoming them inside. "That was almost too easy," Billy murmured. "Don't jinx it," Phyllis warned. They parked behind a line of hedges near the main house and slipped out into the cold night air. The ranch was quiet, eerily quiet. Victor's car hadn't arrived yet. Billy checked his watch. "He'll be here any minute." Sure enough, headlights appeared at the far end of the driveway moments later. Victor NEWMAN's sleek black car rolled toward the house, completely unaware of the trap waiting in the shadows. Phyllis's eyes narrowed. "Showtime." Victor stepped out of the car, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket with his usual air of absolute authority. Even alone in the dark, he carried himself like a man who owned the world. "You made a mistake, Billy boy," Victor's voice suddenly said behind them, but Billy spun around to see Victor had already noticed movement. Victor's instincts were legendary. But this time, Billy moved faster. He lunged forward while Phyllis fired the tranquilizer dart straight into Victor's shoulder. Victor staggered backward, glaring at them with fury and disbelief. "You fools," he growled, but the drug was already taking effect. Within seconds, Victor collapsed to the ground. Billy stared down at the unconscious titan of Genoa City. "Well," he muttered, "that just happened." They worked quickly, binding Victor's wrists and loading him into the SUV. Within minutes, they were speeding away from the ranch, leaving the NEWMAN empire temporarily without its king. Meanwhile, across town, Jack Abbott lay in a hospital bed at Genoa City Memorial, his breathing shallow and labored. Diane Jenkins Abbott sat beside him, clutching his hand as machines beeped softly around them. The doctors had already delivered the terrifying truth. Whatever poison was in Jack's system was unlike anything they had seen before. Without the antidote, he would not survive. Back in the abandoned warehouse Billy had chosen as their hideout, Victor slowly regained consciousness. His eyes opened to find Billy and Phyllis standing over him. Despite the ropes binding his arms to the chair, Victor looked almost amused. "You've both lost your minds," he said coolly. Billy leaned forward, his voice deadly serious. "Cut the act, Victor. We know what you did to Jack." Victor's smile faded slightly, but only slightly. "You'll have to be more specific." Phyllis slammed a metal case onto the table in front of him. Inside were documents, photographs, and a vial containing traces of the toxin Jack had been exposed to. "The poison," she said coldly. "The antidote. And the fact that Jack has 48 hours to live." Victor's expression hardened into silence. Billy's patience snapped. "Where is the antidote?" Victor said nothing. Billy grabbed the chair, shaking it violently. "Jack is dying because of you." Victor stared back with icy calm. "Jack Abbott has been my enemy for decades," he said quietly. "But I never said I wanted him dead." Phyllis leaned in closer, her eyes blazing. "Then prove it." For the first time, a flicker of tension appeared in Victor's gaze. Because he realized something very important in that moment, Billy and Phyllis weren't bluffing. They were desperate enough to do anything. And somewhere across Genoa City, the clock on Jack Abbott's life was ticking down, second by second. The cold silence inside the warehouse thickened as Victor NEWMAN slowly lifted his gaze toward Billy Abbott and Phyllis Summers. Even tied to a chair with his empire temporarily out of reach, Victor carried the same unshakable authority that had made him the most feared man in Genoa City for decades. His expression was calm, too calm, and that only made Billy angrier. Billy paced across the concrete floor, his boots echoing loudly in the cavernous space as the tension grew heavier by the second. Phyllis stood beside a metal table covered with files, syringes, and the small glass vial that represented the nightmare Jack Abbott was living through at that very moment. 48 hours. That was the window before the toxin completely destroyed Jack's body. Except now it was closer to 46. Every minute they wasted was a minute closer to losing him forever. Billy suddenly stopped pacing and slammed both hands onto the table, leaning toward Victor with a glare filled with fury and desperation. "You're going to tell us where the antidote is," he said through clenched teeth. Victor tilted his head slightly, studying Billy like a chess opponent who had just made a reckless move. "You think kidnapping me will save your brother?" Victor asked quietly. "I think it's your only chance," Phyllis snapped before Billy could respond. She stepped forward, her heels striking the floor with deliberate force as she closed the distance between them. "You set a trap for Jack. You poisoned him. And you're the only one who can stop him from dying." Victor's eyes flicked toward the vial on the table. For a brief moment, something passed across his face, an unreadable flash of calculation. But when he spoke again, his voice was steady. "You're assuming a great deal." Billy's temper exploded. He grabbed Victor by the collar and yanked him forward despite the restraints. "Stop playing games," he shouted. "Jack is in a hospital bed fighting for his life right now because of you." Victor didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly met Billy's eyes with an intensity that almost seemed pitying. "You've always been impulsive, Billy boy," Victor said calmly. "It's one of the reasons you lose." Phyllis grabbed Billy's arm, pulling him back before he lost complete control. "Getting angry won't help Jack," she warned quietly. Billy took a breath, trying to steady himself, but the rage inside him was barely contained. Phyllis turned back to Victor, her expression sharper than ever. Let's skip the ego contest. Jack has less than 2 days to live. The doctors can't identify the toxin because it's experimental. Which means you designed this entire thing. Victor's silence was answer enough. Across town, the situation at Genoa City Memorial Hospital was becoming more frightening by the hour. Diane Jenkins Abbott sat beside Jack's hospital bed, gripping his hand tightly as if she could somehow hold him in this world by sheer determination. Jack looked pale beneath the fluorescent lights, his once commanding presence now reduced to the fragile figure lying against crisp white sheets. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside him, but the rhythm had begun to weaken. Carl Abbott stood near the window, staring out into the darkness of the parking lot below. His mind was racing with fear and anger. This doesn't make any sense, Carl said suddenly, turning toward the doctor standing at the foot of the bed. There has to be something you can do. The doctor shook his head grimly. Mr. Abbott's condition is deteriorating faster than we expected. Without knowing exactly what toxin is in his system, we can't create an antidote. Diane's eyes filled with tears. But you're saying there is an antidote? The doctor hesitated before answering. Possibly. If whoever administered the poison developed one. Kyle's jaw tightened instantly. Victor, he muttered under his breath. Diane looked at him sharply. What? Kyle hesitated. Billy had told him earlier about Victor's possible involvement, but he hadn't wanted to believe it. Now the truth seemed unavoidable. If Victor is behind this, Kyle said quietly, then he might be the only one who can save Dad. Diane's face went pale as the horrifying realization settled in. Back at the warehouse, Billy and Phyllis had reached the same conclusion hours earlier. But Victor NEWMAN was proving far more difficult to break than they had anticipated. Billy pulled a chair across from him and sat down, leaning forward with intense focus. Let's make something very clear, Billy said slowly. We're not leaving this room without the antidote. Victor raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan to accomplish that? Phyllis walked over and placed a folder in front of him. By making sure you understand the situation you're in. Victor glanced down at the folder but didn't open it. You kidnapped me, he said simply. You're the ones in trouble. Phyllis smiled faintly. Normally you'd be right. But tonight, you're the hostage and your empire has no idea where you are. Victor's eyes darkened slightly. For the first time since waking up, a crack appeared in his composure. My family will find me, he said. Eventually, Billy replied. But by the time they do, Jack will either be alive or dead because you refuse to help him. Phyllis leaned against the table, watching Victor carefully. You've spent decades fighting Jack, she said. But this isn't business anymore. This is murder. Victor's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Be very careful with that accusation. Billy stood again, pacing restlessly. You want to know the real problem with this whole plan of yours? He asked. Victor didn't answer. Billy stopped and turned toward him. You underestimated how far we'd go to save Jack. Victor's silence stretched for several seconds before he finally spoke again. Suppose I did have this antidote, he said thoughtfully. Why would I give it to you? Phyllis didn't hesitate. Because if Jack dies, your secret dies with him. Victor's gaze snapped back to her. What secret? He asked sharply. Phyllis stepped closer, lowering her voice. The toxin you used, it's not legal. Whoever developed it would face federal charges if this gets out. Billy caught on instantly. Corporate warfare is one thing, he added. Biological weapons? That's prison time, Victor. Victor's jaw tightened slightly, but he still refused to answer. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Jack suddenly groaned in pain. Diane leaned forward immediately. Jack? Can you hear me? Jack's eyes fluttered open weakly, his breathing strained. Diane, he whispered. She squeezed his hand, trying to hold back her tears. I'm here. Jack struggled to speak, every word taking visible effort. Victor, this was his plan. Carl stepped closer to the bed. Dad, don't worry about that right now. But Jack shook his head faintly. Billy needs to stop him. The heart monitor beeped faster as Jack's body fought the poison spreading through his system. Back in the warehouse, Billy's patience had finally reached its breaking point. He grabbed the vial from the table and held it up in front of Victor's face. This toxin is killing my brother, he said coldly. You're going to tell us how to stop it. Victor stared at the vial for a long moment before looking back at Billy. "If Jack dies," Victor said quietly, "it will be because you wasted time playing vigilante." Phyllis slammed her hand against the table. "Enough," she snapped. "Where is the antidote?" Victor studied both of them carefully, weighing his options. He knew something they didn't. The antidote existed, but retrieving it would require revealing a secret that could destroy everything he had built. And Victor NEWMAN did not surrender control easily. Billy leaned closer, his voice low and intense. "The clock is ticking, Victor." Phyllis crossed her arms, watching him with piercing focus. 46 hours left, she said quietly. "Actually," Victor replied calmly, "less than that." The words sent a chill through the room. Billy's eyes widened with fury. "What did you say?" Victor met his gaze without blinking. "The toxin progresses faster than you realize." Phyllis felt a wave of panic rising in her chest. "Then tell us how to stop it," she demanded. Victor leaned back slightly in the chair, the ropes creaking as he moved. For the first time, he looked almost tired. "If I help you," he said slowly, "everything changes." Billy didn't hesitate. "Good," he said. "Because if Jack dies tonight, nothing in Genoa City will ever be the same." And as the seconds ticked by in that cold warehouse, Victor NEWMAN finally began to realize that the balance of power in his endless war with the Abbotts might have shifted in a way even he could no longer control. Meanwhile, in a hospital room across town, Jack Abbott's heartbeat continued its fragile fight against time, with every passing second bringing him closer to the edge. "I prefer this response." The cold air inside the abandoned warehouse seemed to grow heavier with every passing minute as Victor NEWMAN sat tied to the chair, his sharp eyes scanning Billy Abbott and Phyllis Summers with a mixture of irritation and calculation. Even restrained, Victor carried himself like the most powerful man in the room. Billy paced back and forth like a caged animal, the tension in his body barely contained. Phyllis stood nearby with her arms folded, watching Victor carefully, as if waiting for the smallest crack in his armor. Somewhere across Genoa City, Jack Abbott was lying in a hospital bed fighting for his life, and the ticking clock in Billy's mind felt louder with every second. 48 hours. Now it was already closer to 46. Billy suddenly stopped pacing and leaned forward, gripping the table in front of Victor. "Let's stop pretending, Victor," he said sharply. "You poisoned Jack. You have the antidote. And if you don't hand it over right now, things are going to get a lot worse for you." Victor tilted his head slightly, as though he were almost bored by the accusation. "You've always been impulsive, Billy boy," he replied calmly. "That's why you've never been able to hold on to power for very long." Phyllis rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, spare us the lecture," she snapped. "Your whole empire is built on intimidation and manipulation. You wanted leverage over the Abbotts, so you decided poisoning Jack would give you the upper hand." Victor's expression hardened. "You two breaking into my home and kidnapping me isn't exactly the moral high ground." Billy slammed his fist against the table. "Jack is dying." For the first time, Victor didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched long enough to make Billy's frustration burn hotter. "Tell us where the antidote is," Billy demanded. Victor slowly leaned back as far as the ropes allowed. "You're making a very serious mistake," he said quietly. "When my family realizes I'm missing, they will find you." Phyllis leaned forward, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, I'm counting on it. Because by the time they do, you'll already have told us exactly what we need to know." Victor studied her for a moment, recognizing the fire in her eyes. Phyllis Summers had never been someone who played by the rules, and that unpredictability made her dangerous. Across town, the atmosphere at Genoa City Memorial Hospital was tense and somber. Diane Jenkins Abbott sat beside Jack's bed, her fingers wrapped tightly around his hand as she stared at the monitors. Jack's breathing had become more uneven, and the doctors had already warned her that the toxin was progressing faster than they expected. Kyle Abbott stood near the window, his arms crossed as he struggled to keep his composure. "This can't be happening," Kyle said quietly. "My dad is one of the strongest people I know." Diane's eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to remain calm. "We're not giving up," she said firmly. "Billy is working on something." "I know he is." Kyle looked at her uncertainly. You really think Billy can fix this? Diane hesitated for only a moment. Yes, she said softly. Because when it comes to Jack, Billy will do whatever it takes. Back at the warehouse, Billy had reached the end of his patience. He grabbed Victor's chair and spun it around so they were face to face. Listen carefully, Billy said in a low voice. You don't get to sit there and act like you're in control. Not this time. Victor raised an eyebrow. You believe kidnapping me gives you power? Billy leaned closer. No. But Jack dying would give you power. And I'm not letting that happen. Phyllis walked over and placed a small digital recorder on the table. Here's how this works, she said calmly. You tell us where the antidote is, we go get it, and Jack lives. Simple.